Good evening, all. Welcome to tonight's annual licensing committee meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Natalia Perez, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. If I lose connection and can't reconnect, Councillor Fiona Smith will take over for me. I'd like to please remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. Please wait until I call on you before speaking. I also ask that members keep their questions and comments brief and to the point. Thank you. If any councillor leaves the meeting or loses connection during an item, we will pause and wait a few minutes for them to reconnect. If a councillor is not present for a substantial part of the discussion of an item, then they will not be included in deliberations or decisions that we need to make this evening. The quorum for this meeting is 6 members of the committee. If we have fewer than 6 members in attendance, I will have to adjourn the meeting, but I have received confirmation from governance that we have 6 members this evening, so we shall proceed. Let's move on to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Charles, have we got apologies for this evening, please?
Just Councillor Uber, Chair.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 2, roll call and declaration of interests. I will now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. We should have with us Councillor Wesley Harcourt.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sue Macmillan. I don't see Sue with us. Councillor David Morton. Councillor Sarah Koyum. Councillor Asif Siddiqui.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Fiona Smith.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dominic Stanton.
Present, Chair. Also a small declaration. I have been contacted by a number of residents regarding a matter that's in the exempt agenda.
Thank you. It is noted. Councillor Francis Stainton. And Councillor Matt Thorley.
Present, Chair, I have the same declaration of interest, albeit for different premises of the exempt agenda, and I will be staying in the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to agenda item number 3, which are the open minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of February 2021. Are there any comments on the open minutes, please? I can see no hand raised. Okay, I take that as a no. Okay, then are the minutes agreed? I see some up, thumbs up.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we are in agreement. Let's move on then to agenda item number 4, annual licensing committee report covering the period April 2020 to March 2021. This report provides a summary of the work and performance of the licensing team for the period the 1st of April 2020 until the 31st of March 2021. We should note, please, that appendices 2 and 3 of the report are exempt and will require the committee to pass the proposed resolution at the end of the agenda to exclude members of the public and press from the proceedings for that discussion. Can I please invite Mr. Adrian Overton and Ms. Lisa White, please, to present the report? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to try and share my screen, so just bear with me for a moment, 1 second. I'm not sure if you can see that now.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay. So it's just it's just a slide. You can't see, you can just see the main slide because I'm just conscious exactly what can be seen. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. 1 second. Okay, thank you. Good evening, councillors. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for taking time out this evening to attend the annual licensing committee. I appreciate it's the end of the working day for everyone, so we will try to make it as concise and as interesting as possible, as licensing allows anyway. So firstly, I thought it might help to carry out some introductions, as there will be a few people from the licensing service speaking this evening. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Adrian Overton. I'm the Licensing Policy and Enforcement Manager, and I jointly manage the licensing service with Lisa White. Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Good evening, councillors. So yes, as you know, I'm Lisa White, and I'm the Administration and Enforcement Manager, and like Adrian says, we jointly manage the service together. I predominantly manage the administration side, and Adrian predominantly manages the enforcement side.
Brilliant, thanks, Lisa. I think Christina Perez may also be on the call, and she might answer some questions in relation to any enforcement questions in the enforcement side of the service later on. Christina, are you there? Are you on the call?
I am. Hi, Adrian. Hi, everyone. As you mentioned, I'm Christina Perez. I'm the Licensing Enforcement Officer for Hammersmith and Fulham.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christina. And I think that also Ben Chadwick and Tom Stewart from the police licensing team are present this evening.
Yeah, good evening. Tom Stewart, Met Police Licensing Officer covering Hammersmith and Fulham.
Ben, are you there as well?
Yes, it's Ben Chadwick. I'm a licensed sergeant for Central West BCU, which incorporates Hammersmith and Fulham, RBKC in Westminster.
Excellent, thank you. So this evening, I'm slightly conscious that the last time that we had a licensing committee meeting was in February, so it's quite recent. So I wanted to change the format slightly. So in that date, we're going to have a full update on the service, but we're going to reduce it slightly. And I know that we had a comprehensive COVID update previously. And whilst we're going to provide a brief update on the COVID side of the service, we're not proposing to go into quite as much detail as we did previously. And I think that's going to allow us then to go into a bit more detail on the policy side of things. And I know there's been a couple of issues with the policies recently, so we can obviously go into a bit more detail if needed. So then, as we can see here, we've got the annual licensing committee, and then we've got the supplementary agenda that we wanted to discuss in more detail, and also our pool of conditions as well. So yeah, we've got that there as well. So as outlined, just to go through COVID, and as I said, we have discussed that previously in quite some detail. In March 2020, all officers in the licensing service, along with the majority of council officers, were asked to work from home with immediate effect. And although the vast majority of applications were available online prior to the pandemic, there were still some applications, for example, such as personal licenses, which required passport photos to be submitted, and therefore these could not be made online. We initially adjourned licensing committees, and then we moved licensing committees online after a few months. And we continue to find that this is a great success. This really works for residents, and it works for us as well. It means that residents that obviously can attend committees from the comfort of their own homes. They don't need to make their way into the town hall. And we found that attendance, albeit virtually, has increased at licensing committees. So that's massively helps, and it means that officers don't have to stay later at meetings. So that obviously helps greatly from an overtime point of view as well. And during COVID, new procedures and processes were created and adapted during the pandemic. For example, this includes the process for signing licenses. This is now fully online, and that includes the drafting of licenses and the process of signing them as well. And as outlined on the slide, the enforcement of licensed premises continued in the form of drive-by inspections. So where we would previously be going into licensed premises and we'd be talking to license holders, etc., we could drive by a premises and we could see if they were operating. And due to the lockdown regulations, it was quite clear if somebody was operating when they shouldn't have been. It became slightly more complex when there was the tiered regulations. This meant that there were certain rules and regulations that we had to make sure that we were aware of, because licensed premises needs to be aware of those as well. So as you can imagine, and as touched on previously during the last annual licensing committee, we were incredibly busy carrying out COVID enforcement during the pandemic, and this included issuing fixed penalty notices, prohibition notices, and we're actually the first licensing authority to revoke a license for COVID-19 offences. Everyone will be aware that obviously COVID legislation has now been removed. So we are now shifting our focus onto assisting businesses whilst they try to adapt to a new environment. And we're ensuring that we look to risk assess any new businesses which have opened, because there have been quite a few that have opened during the pandemic, where operators have seen opportunities, or they've decided that they want to alter the way that they're operating to make the most of the new environment. I think now, if I can pass over to Lisa, I think she's going to run through the next couple of slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. So I just wanted to pull out some key stats from the report, really, rather than going in too much detail. But so currently 951 licensed premises. That's all different types of licensed premises across the borough. So alcohol, gambling, the sex establishments, the scrap metal as well. And we've got 3,687 personal licenses issued in Hammersmith and Fulham. In 2021 overall, we dealt with 756 applications and notifications under the Licensing Act, and you can see from the figures and from the graph that is a 53% reduction on the previous year, and the main reason for that was temporary event notices. So the previous year there was 822 temporary event notices issued, whereas within this period there was only 171. And as you're aware, temporary event notices are normally held for one-off parties, outdoor events. So obviously through that COVID period, which we're kind of talking about 20 to 21, we received a fraction of the applications. However, you would think that 53% less applications meant that we were a lot less busy. That actually wasn't the case, because we actually received a significant, I think it was like a 43% increase in our new premises license applications during that period, which was very strange, given that we were in and out of different lockdowns, that we had, I think, like Adrian touched on, new businesses seeing a potential opportunity. The difference being is obviously temporary event notices are a notification which are extremely quick for us to process as a team. We don't have to issue anything, it's a notification, whereas a new premises application is quite time consuming. It has 28-day consultation. We have to deal with residents' questions and then obviously issue the license and and carry out any subsequent committees. So yeah, a significant increase in new premises license applications, but also a significant decrease in temporary event notices. And then in relation to gambling, our gambling premises pretty much stayed the same through this period. We dropped from 32 to 30. I think the previous year there was a significant drop in gambling premises, but this period only 2. And we've got our 3 betting shops, 3 AGCs, the 24 betting shops, and the 3 bingo licenses still in the borough. As you can see, we've still got our 121 active permits and small society lottery authorizations. And the sex establishments and the scrap metal sites have remained the same for this period. Thanks, Adrian. Can you move on to the next slide?
Oh, yeah, I'm just struggling with my computer. Actually, it's not allowing me to move on. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I know that in the last committee that we discussed the finance management of the team, and it was something the members really fed back that they wanted included in this committee. So we've put a great deal of information in the report, but just to pull out some key figures. So our income for this period was 307,900. So it was a decrease on the year before. The main decrease was because of our application fees, which I was talking about in relation to the temporary event notices, and that did kind of affect our budget. The licensing debt we had for this period was 18,000. I think for the previous year it was 16,000. So it was an increase of 2,000 on the previous year. And although any increase on debt is obviously not good, I think that considering the period which we were in, where businesses were struggling and they were closed the majority of the time, to kind of keep it around that figure was quite an achievement for the team, really. And just to report that, you know, the debt is significantly lower now we're out of COVID and businesses are kind of back on their feet, which is obviously good. And we issued 228 suspension letters, which is again about the same as the previous period. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll try and move on to the next slide now. There we go. I hope everyone can see that. So yeah, as it's outlined on the slide, the enforcement team investigates a wide range of complaints from a number of sources, so such as residents, councillors, etc. Officers are always working in partnership with the police licensing team. We've got a very good relationship with the police licensing team. We investigate violent incidents or disorder in the immediate vicinity of a licensed premises. This partnership has been highly effective in tackling crime and disorder in and around licensed premises, and has led to a number of licensing reviews or other enforcement action in the past. I would say that the approach is really focused on and massively helps, and it's sort of anchored by the fortnightly licensing action group, which all responsible authorities are invited to attend. And this group really helps to sort of look at problem premises. It looks at complained about premises, and then if there are issues, it looks to try and deal with those issues from a multi-agency approach as well. So that massively helps, and we often develop a number of actions at those meetings. During 2020-21, the team were predominantly focused on COVID compliance visits and inspections, as you can imagine, and we carried out 392 visits, and of those visits that included general licensing inspections as well. And Christina, I know you chair the licensing action group. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything else to this, to those points.
I don't really have too much to add following Adrian's introduction. As a general enforcement update from myself, 2020 was clearly a difficult year affecting everyone. From a business financial perspective, the hospitality sector was severely impacted. It didn't help that the COVID legislation was changing what appeared to be every 3 minutes, which added to the difficulty in ensuring I was constantly aware of the rules and regulations prior to advising our residents and business owners on how to operate. I did mention in our previous meeting that during the public health situation, we were being pragmatic with respect to certain conditions, particularly where they directly conflicted with government legislation and advice at the time. Now that COVID restrictions have been lifted, I have resumed visits and inspections focusing on licensing legislation compliance. That's something that's going to happen moving forward. Since the restrictions have been lifted, it has appeared that there is an increase in residential complaints who have expressed issues with customer noise in particular. I am conscious that many residents have explained that they are working from home, which moving forward may be something that we will need to consider when advising our operators. An aim in enforcement is also to build and maintain effective communication and a working relationship between residents, operators, and ourselves. If not already a condition for a licensed operator as part of a stepped approach to address any residential concerns raised, I have been advising our operators to arrange and accommodate resident meetings to allow residents to voice concerns and discuss any remedial action. I don't really have anything further to add at this time. I mean, that's just a general update from myself. what we've done since, again, just resuming licensing visits and licensing compliance, but I'm open to any questions that councillors may have either now or at the end of this meeting.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Christina. I know you dealt with the majority of COVID complaints, so I thought it might help to have that update. Thank you. So just moving on to the next slide. So this is something where we're really looking for sort of a steer from members, a steer from councillors about. So obviously it's about the cumulative impact policies in Fulham and Shepherd's Bush. And so just by way of a background, the licensing service was due to carry out a review of both policies in 2020 to assess the evidence for renewals of both the policies. And this obviously couldn't take place due to COVID-19. If we had have gathered evidence, it would have been almost useless. It wouldn't have given us any evidence for issues of antisocial behaviour, etc. So a consultation on the removal of the policies and possible evidence gathering for new policies has now taken place, and this is finished. And it showed that there was strong support for the existing policies, and this was supported with a proposal to delay evidence gathering until 2022. So that was a separate question in our consultation, whether we should delay that evidence gathering. And it was, I think 100% of the questions said, of the answers rather, said yes, we should delay that evidence gathering until 2022. So both policies were due to be removed from our overall statement of licensing policy at a full council meeting on the 20th of October. That was our original intention. This did not take place, as it was suggested that the decision should instead be taken at the next full council meeting on the 19th of January 2022, which we're now going to do. So this, I suppose, it leaves two options for us in relation to the reintroduction of CIP policies. We're aware that residents are very keen on CIP policies. We're aware that members are very keen on CIP policies as well. So there's two sort of routes that we could take here. So we could now start a short evidence gathering study over the winter months in an effort to introduce new policies to be approved at the January 2022 full council meeting. The problem, I suppose, with this approach is that there's a risk that insufficient evidence will be collected during the winter months, the quieter months. Some of the key evidence that we collected during the previous evidence gathering study for our licensing policies, CIP policies, was in relation to outside drinking, off sales, etc. And I don't think we're going to capture that evidence over the next few months. So the second option is that we could wait until the spring of 2022, when we could have a longer evidence gathering study, which could take place then. And this, I think, would maybe not capture all the issues in the summer, but it would start to capture issues with off sales, outdoor drinking, etc. And that would mean that any new policies could be approved at the May 2022 full council meeting, so we can get those policies introduced then. What that would mean is that obviously the policies would expire, would be removed in January 2022, and that the new policies wouldn't be approved until later on, until May. But I think the key point is to note that the evidence for the existing policies actually expired earlier on this year in April. So we have been going on for a period of time without those policies, or without the evidence for those policies. And we've made the best case for that, because we've made decisions based on cumulative impact. And we've made that because the section 182 guidance says that cumulative impact can be taken into account in the absence of a specific policy. So I think that's an important point, to make. And we haven't received any appeals on that basis. So I think that going forward, we can be confident that we can make decisions, and we can talk about cumulative impact, and we don't have to have a specific cumulative impact policy in place. So that's certainly something to bear in mind. In relation to the gambling policy, so we're in a similar situation where it didn't get approved at the recent October full council meeting. It is still due to expire in January 2022. We did have a 10-week consultation period, which has now ended. All of the consultees thought that the council should retain its no casino resolution. We didn't get a huge amount of responses, but as I said, 100% did think that it should be retained. There was also strong support for limiting the times during which AGCs, adult gaming centres, could operate, and we suggested an 11 p.m. Closure time for those premises. The legislation allows them to operate potentially 24 hours. The police were also in support of the limitation of the hours for AGC premises. They mentioned issues with lone working, individuals working in those premises later at night, and maybe some unreported crimes later on in the evening. And they had no concerns with the removal of the council's no casino resolution. A proposal was made, or was recently been made, to further reduce the AGC closure time to 10 p.m. So where we consulted on 11 p.m, at the last minute, a proposal was made for a 10 p.m. closure. So we're currently looking into this, and as a result of that, we didn't take the policy, and it wasn't approved. Our new gambling policy wasn't approved in the October meeting, so that's why we knocked this decision into the January 2022 meeting. So we are now looking between that difference. We're looking between the difference between the 11 p.m. closure and the 10 p.m. closure. But the difficulty is just trying to find evidence for that hour and what difference that hour makes. And I think it's going to be quite challenging to find really definitive evidence to show that just an hour's change is going to mean that more vulnerable people, for example, are enticed into gambling premises or into AGCs. My personal opinion is that we should go with the 11 p.m. closure, because that's what that's a massive advance from what we've currently got. So that's certainly going to help, and then we could always look to reduce that hour, in later years or months, etc. So the licensing policy is also, it seems like all of our policies are due for renewal in a very short amount of time. It's due to expire in July 2022. We're looking to sort of change the focus of the licensing policy, and rather than sort of a rule of restrictions and rules of what you can't do, rather than say what you can do in certain areas, and make it more sort of aspirational as a policy, rather than, as I said, like a list of things that you can't do. So we're looking to possibly replicate the planning regeneration areas. So some or all of these areas could be highlighted as special policy areas for new businesses. We're looking to offer free pre-application advice to small businesses who want to provide entertainment, for example. And we are currently working with the Night Czar and the head of the Nighttime Commission about further opportunities to promote a 24-hour borough in London. A 12-week consultation period is due to start on the 31st of January. That's our timetable at the moment. And it's due to finish on the 24th of April 2022. The evidence, an evidence gathering study that we've decided to do for the licensing policy will commence in late March, and we could potentially also gather evidence for new cumulative impact policies, not necessarily just in Shepherd's Bush and in existing areas, for example, but we could look to encompass new areas as well, if it's required. But I think the key is that we do need direction in terms of the general theme of our licensing policy, which is looking to help new businesses thrive. However, we're aware that those businesses, if we do ask them to thrive, if we are looking for that general focus, that they may have an impact on the lives of local residents, and there could be an increase in general nuisance, etc., that's generated. So I think that's the compromise that we need to think about and that we need to reach. So just moving on to questions there, and I do appreciate that I've asked quite a lot of questions there, and I think they are mainly policy questions, but really the main policy questions is whether, I suppose, just to summarise them, is whether we do delay the evidence gathering for new CIP areas into the spring of next year, or whether we just pursue the evidence gathering now through the winter months. I think that's mainly the main point. The secondary point is about the AGCs and about the 11 p.m. closure, and whether we do try to look for the evidence for that extra hour, bringing it down to 10 p.m, or whether we say, actually, we're happy with the 11 p.m. closure. That's something, it's better than what we had before, and that we stick with that, and then maybe we look to advance on that in future. So I suppose they're the main things that we need a steer on, but I don't know if there's any other questions that members have or if anybody else has at this point.
Can I start? Well, Adrian, thanking you and Lisa and Christina, who I know are present this evening, and all the other officers as well that contribute to the licensing service for all the work in the last year. And we know it's been a very challenging year, and services have had to transform rapidly and in a diligent way to make sure that the services were up and running. So thank you very much as well, and thank you for the very thorough report. I would now like to invite other members for to ask questions about what we've just heard, and also what we need to sort of consider this evening. I'm just looking at the hands raised, and I can see Councillor Stanton. Councillor Stanton?
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, officers, also for that report. I've got a couple of questions, really just for clarification about the cumulative impact assessments. And the first thing really is just to get right in my mind exactly what the current status is with regards to the policy. As I understand it, we can, in licensing subcommittees, take note of the policies, but they're not sort of enforceable. Is that just to get my right in my mind? Is that correct?
It's slightly different. Nearly, yeah. I suppose we can take into account cumulative impact per se, the idea of cumulative impact, but we can't actually take into account the policies, the specific policies and their evidence, because that evidence is expired. So, say for example, we had a case recently on Uxbridge Road, and there's a large amount of late night refreshment premises. I think there's, maybe 4 or 5 in a row. And we said, look, there's an obvious cumulative impact of those types of premises. So we don't need to have a study to say that there's lots of them. There just are lots of them. So we can take that into account, and that's not going to be a problem. But where maybe you've got less of those types of premises, that's where the study and where you've got evidence to show that would really come into its own, because you can say, well, it doesn't look like that, but we've actually got some evidence and people have stood out there late at night and they've shown that it is causing an impact on local residents. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. So sort of yes and no in a way.
Well, that's what I thought you might say. In which case, if the impact zones as they currently are, that status, are removed in January, subsequent to potentially being reintroduced in May, what would the difference be between that kind of down period between January and May? And if there is a difference, how would we benefit from removing them in January rather than removing and then reintroducing at the same time in May, Council?
I think, I mean, my answer to that is that it's quite academic, really. I mean, the evidence for the policies expired in April this year. So the policies have not been effective since this time. So it's just a question of whether they're in our overall licensing policy, and they're in there at the moment. So if an operator picks up our policies, they might say, oh, hang on a minute, Hammersmith and Fulham have got cumulative impact policies, but that's not actually the case. They're not actually effective at the moment. We don't have the evidence to back them up, so we're not using them. All we're doing is when we make decisions, we're talking about cumulative impact per se. We're talking about cumulative impact that's mentioned in the guidance. So it would make zero difference if we remove them later on. The only thing is we have received, and I know legal might want to come in here, we have received legal advice about leaving them in there in our overall license policy for too long, because it can be misleading, and it's not showing the true picture, that we're not relying on them, etc. So my personal view is that we need to remove them sooner rather than later, until we've got that full evidence that we can show that they need to be reintroduced. And maybe they're in different areas, or maybe they're different sizes, or maybe maybe they don't reappear. But I think we need to be conscious. We need to get the evidence first of all.
Thank you. Just one final question on that, which is really that given that it was, that the problem's been caused by COVID, what lobbying the council has done to government to actually allow the evidence to be extended? the use of evidence to be extended beyond the 3 years?
We did. I can't say we did that, but Westminster Council actually did that. They did lobby government for a change in legislation, but apparently it was primary legislation, and the government didn't want to do that at that time. Obviously, they had an awful lot to deal with during COVID, and they didn't think it was a priority to change that legislation. So it was left as it was, and a lot of councils are in exactly the same situation as us, and a lot of councils have let their cumulative impact policies expire, the evidence expire, and they've actually removed their policies from their overall licensing policy. And there is a movement to say that the cumulative impact policies are maybe not something of this era, so to speak, and maybe they were more something that, you know, when you used to have a Wetherspoons and used to have lots of licensed premises next to each other, that they were more focused on trying to control those types of issues, whereas nowadays we have all sorts of licensed premises working next to each other. And I don't know, there are some, you know, schools of thought that say that they're just not quite as appropriate in this era as they were previously.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adrian, as well, and thank you, Councillor Stanton. I noted that our legal officer had wanted to maybe give her opinion at this stage. Was your hand up? Was Gerta, are you here?
I think it's Jane, but I'm just confirming.
Okay.
Yes, just to confirm that Council's opinion was that it's better for us to wait until we've got useful information to put before full council rather than seek to remove the policies at this stage. And on that basis, we are in a lawful position at the moment.
Thank you very much for your explanation. I'm keen to hear from PC Stewart as well and Sergeant Chadwick in terms of what has happened in the last year as well. And I know, Adrian, how you said that you've all worked in collaboration and you have regular meetings, but I would be keen as well to hear from the police, from licensing police, please, if possible. And their views as well on the current conversation that we're having regarding the cumulative impact policy, please.
Yeah, hello, good evening, Chair. PC Tom Stewart here. I'm happy to comment on the policies. Yeah, we have obviously been consulted in regards to the removal of the policies. I think the feeling towards the Shepherd's Bush policy is that something probably should be in place sooner rather than later, due to there being obviously still a high level of crime and disorder that takes place in that particular area. The case may not be the same for Fulham, because there has been a sort of an obvious reduction in crime in the Fulham area. But obviously a lot of that's obviously post-COVID, so things haven't quite stayed itself to pre-COVID sort of environments. Also of note, I think we have already spoken to a couple of premises who are considering applying for extensions on their licensing hours down in Fulham, and obviously this is potentially a reaction to the CIP no longer being in force. Obviously, if there's applications that we believe undermine the objectives, they will be objected to. However, there won't be a presumption to refuse due to the CIP not being in place. Obviously, that's worth considering. And as Adrian said, we've obviously worked very closely together over the last 18 months, obviously both COVID and sort of business as usual, which we're sort of coming back to now. And I think that sort of relationship is just going to continue. Any sort of issues we have, we always make the licensing team aware and make sure it's brought up at the bi-monthly lag meetings. But obviously we're happy to provide us any evidence that we can do to support any future CIP for both Shepherd's Bush and for Fulham. But yeah, I think there should be something in place, ideally for Shepherd's Bush. Obviously, like I said, the levels of crime disorder, alcohol related, is fairly high, and it tends to be more around off sales than it does regarding on sales. Which, when the CIPs were first introduced, they were sort of primarily focused on the on sales and sort of the crime disorder that generally relates to pubs and clubs. However, the violence that we tend to see around Shepherd's Bush Green in particular is related to the off sale of alcohol perform off licenses, not so much from the pubs. So that's something worth considering in the next assessment for sure.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Chair, if I could just come in here as well, it's Sergeant Chadwick here. I think to reiterate what Adrian said, there has been a national shift away from CI policy. From the start of COVID, I was consultee for the Westminster CIA and their most recent licensing policy, and they've removed 2 out of their 3 CIA areas and kind of extended the main West End area. So it's very much a national trend that we're seeing at the moment of a reduction in these cumulative impact areas.
Thank you very much. Okay, other members this evening want to comment or have questions? I'm just looking at. I can see no other hand raised. So, Adrian, do we have to decide anything? That's the first question. You said that you wanted us to steer a conversation, and we've heard this evening as well from the police and also from our legal team, legal officers. So, in terms of this evening's meeting, what are we asked to do, please?
I suppose it was more of a steer. As I said, we're going to gather evidence for new CIP areas. There's no doubt of that, and that's what the results of the consultation. But it's when we do it, and I got feedback that it was, just do it as soon as possible. Do it now. Do it over the winter. I didn't personally think that was a great idea, because if you do want new CIP policies, you're not going to get the best evidence. So I thought the best idea was to do it in the spring, when we can coincide that with our licensing policy. We can do one evidence gathering study, and if it points to new CIP policies, great. If it doesn't, well, we've done it anyway. But it was just almost just to check that whether there was that rush, where the members were getting that feedback from residents, etc., that we need to get these in as soon as possible. The point I wanted to get across is that we're still considering cumulative impact in the absence of policies. So I'm not going to say it doesn't really matter, but it really mitigates the effects of not having those policies. The fact that we can still use it and we can still take into account of it in our decisions. And then if we do want specific policies, then we could gather it at a later date. So it was really that guidance. And I personally thought option 2 was the better option, but I just wanted to run that by members, really.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And thank you all for your comments. I mean, what's happening on the ground as well. So I think your position as officers, with the expertise that you have, is we need to give way to that as well. So thank you for your views.
The only thing I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but yeah, I just wanted to be fully transparent, because I know that's something we consulted on, and I wanted to check that members were just aligned with that as well. And then the other point, sorry to interrupt again, but it was just about because I asked a few questions, but one of them was about the 10 p.m. closure, because this is at the very last minute when we were going to have our gambling policy renewed. It was mentioned that maybe we could be slightly more restrictive, and we could look for a 10 p.m. closure on adult gaming centres. And I wanted to know if members were still keen on that decision, or whether they were happy for us just to approve the policy on the basis of an 11 p.m. closure, considering that we've consulted on that and we can get that moving quite quickly and approved in January, basically. But whereas it might be quite tricky just to find evidence for that particular hour from 10 to 11. I appreciate members may want to be more restrictive with these premises, but I think it's going to be really challenging to find that evidence for that hour. So that's the other thing that I wanted to get advice on as well.
Thank you very much. Do I have any members wanting to comment on this, please? I'm just looking at colleagues and if they've got their hands raised. I just have a question, Adrian. Can we compromise halfway? 10:30, is that an option?
Well, the difficulty with that is that we just don't have the evidence. I suppose the good thing about the 11 p.m. closure is that we've consulted on it, and we consulted for 10 weeks. So we can look back on that decision if we approve that, and we can say, well, here's, nobody said otherwise. But whereas, even 10:30 or, it would be, well, we haven't, why have we decided that? But we've got that justification for a certain time. So that's where it makes it tricky. If we change the time, whether it's 10:59 or whatever, we've consulted on a certain time. So I don't know, maybe in retrospect we could have consulted on an earlier closing time for agencies and not actually mentioned the time, but we did mention the time, so that's where it makes it sort of slightly more complicated, I suppose.
Any members wish to comment? PC Stewart.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I thought I'll comment if it's appropriate, but I agree with Adrian that a reduction in hours as a standard for AGCs is obviously a very positive thing. So I think it would be beneficial to have that sort of ratified as soon as possible rather than delay it any further. Obviously, because we've already had a few AGC applications come in, and obviously the presumption is to allow them to have 24 hours if that's what they request, which they obviously would do. And I think there won't be a huge difference between 10 and 11 p.m. A lot of the other licensed premises in the area or in the borough, a lot of them will be closing around 11 o'clock. Not many of them close at 10. So in terms of sort of becoming a bit of a destination premises following going to the pub, I don't think it'll make a huge amount of difference. And obviously the evidence at the moment doesn't show a huge difference between the two times. So I'll definitely concur with what Adrian says about the 11 o'clock.
Thank you for your comments. Okay. Adrian, I do hope that what we've heard this evening and comments from participants helps the process and helps the way next steps are taken.
No, most definitely. No, it does. Yeah, no, that's helpful, and yeah, that's something that we can move forward with, certainly. Yeah.
Are there opportunities for other members to comment going forward, or are there going to be further opportunities to engage in this process as well?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, I don't know. With the previous policies, obviously, we've gone through the councillor process of going to various committees, like we've been to the PAC committee, what used to be known as the scrutiny committee and whatever. So there's always steps along the way that members can be made aware, and we give councillor updates as well on our thinking. So yeah, no, 100%. And if at any stage members want to have a chat with me or other officers just generally about our approach to certain things, we're always here, and we can always listen to that, because I think it's worth noting, we form our policies on the basis of what members are saying, essentially, because they're reflecting what residents are saying. So we're here to listen to that, and we just want to make sure that we're focusing and we're moulding our policies in a certain way to reflect what residents and what members are saying. So yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear there are other opportunities. So please, all members, just take this into account going forward. That's appreciated. Thank you very much, Adrian. Okay. If there are no further comments or questions, I think we know the content of the report, as well as the comments that we've had this evening, and comments as well from the police. So if there are no further comments or questions, are we happy to move on to agenda item number 5?
I'm happy for that, Chair. Yeah.
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much. Charles, can you please help us? I'm thinking about the viewing options. In my case, I can only see a black screen. I cannot see any presentation. Can we go back to the gallery mode, please?
Adrian has to stop sharing his screen share, and it should all come back.
Apologies, let me just do that now. 1 second.
No problem. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Adrian. Okay, then let's move on to agenda item number 5, please. Verbal discussion on deadlines. Okay, for late evidence submissions for licensing subcommittees.
So, yeah, I don't know if I can help with this, Chair, but this was just in relation to, I suppose, an ongoing issue that we've had that's become more prevalent recently, where applicants have started to submit large volumes of evidence within, hours sometimes of a licensing committee. So we just wanted to basically bolster our procedures and say that they, that couldn't happen, and that we would make a recommendation that maybe, I don't know, the time is to be decided, but maybe 24 hours or 48 hours before the hearing would be a deadline for submitting extra evidence. And that would really help us from an administration point of view, because I think what happens, and also from the members' point of view, because what happens is you can get huge documents that are submitted, and then we have to circulate them to you, and then you have to obviously consider them and take them into account. But whereas if we had something in our procedures that said, actually, you can't do this before X time, then at least, that would offer us some protection from that point of view.
I totally agree about the importance of having a deadline and in licensing subcommittees where we hear from the applicant or other parties the last minute evidence, and then we have to decide whether we take that into account or not, and whether it has been circulated to all parties or not. It definitely makes sense to have a strict deadline that applies to all. Do we have members' views on this, please? Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it really is a tricky one, because sometimes these things move very quickly, and something does come to light for all manner of reasons. And I don't think it would be fair to categorise what is okay and what isn't. There could be, that's for the committee to decide in the moment. If you did have a guillotine of 24 hours, then and I'm not even suggesting that's a good time, but if you did have this limit and it was well known, it was in our procedures, and we could implement it from a certain date, one hopes you might end up with sort of last minute flurries as people realise, yep, 24 hours is the latest we've got. But it would stop the kind of difficulties on the day, particularly with most of us working full-time as well. So we've probably already set aside a little bit of time for those final things. And then if there's a huge bundle of things, it can sway things unduly. So I would support there being a hard limit for any kind of extra evidence, really. And if it can't reach us in time, I'm not even sure we should look at discretion. I think it should just be, if that's the case, that's the case, and it's advertised and all parties know that that's what we do. That would be my feeling, because it does seem to happen quite a lot, and it can have an undue spotlight on that one thing, which can skew things one way or another unfairly.
Chair, if I may add just on this point, maybe legal might have some comments. Our view is obviously any time limit given would be guidance, because legally they can submit information. Obviously, we would have to make an applicant aware that the later they leave it and the larger the bundle, the more risk they run of, having their hearing adjourned, because we don't have time to circulate it to all parties or for everyone to consider it. So it would be guidance only, in the hope that, even if there is a percentage of applicants then comply with that, it will reduce the number we have coming through the last minute. But obviously, an applicant still can legally, even if we said 24 hours or 48 hours, they could still submit it a few hours beforehand. But like I say, then they run the risk of having the hearing adjourned. So I don't think we could enforce it unless legal advise us otherwise. It would be guidance. We can ask for it, but they don't really need to comply with it.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and thank you, Lisa. Can we please ask Jane to comment?
Yeah, hi. Lisa's absolutely right. you know, it has to be a full and sort of fair process, and there might be a reason why somebody's submitting evidence at a late stage. So we really should be considering that. That said, I think it would be useful for members to have a kind of a bit of a guidance around when you would consider late submissions, in hope that people would comply with that, because I think it would be helpful for the committee to work in a more efficient way. But of course, we need to think about each one on a case-by-case basis, and we need to be fair to the applicants.
Thank you very much, Jane. So we're looking is basically to have a guidance.
I think, yeah, sorry if I can interrupt there, Chair. I think that's essentially it. We sort of realise that if somebody does produce something last minute where we're going to have to accept it, the legislation doesn't say that we can't, you know, that we shouldn't accept it, but it's just almost to have that guidance, because it almost seemed to be that it was the rule rather than the exception. So we just wanted to change that thing so that, okay, occasionally someone's going to come along and they're going to say, oh, I need this to be heard. But just for the vast majority of stuff, we just seems that every committee, we were having huge volumes of evidence being submitted at the very last minute. And I know that's really, that's very stressful on committee services, as it is for us as well. So yeah, and for members as well, it's trying to consider that. So it's just trying to change the tide, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, I personally think that it does make sense. So what for that guidance, are we going to have some suggested ideal deadline then, knowing that people are allowed to submit later, but ideally at a particular time?
Yes, so we would be guided by legal, but I don't know, potentially 24 hours. We would say, look, 24 hours before the hearing, this is the deadline, and we'd make it really apparent, and we would make applicants really well aware and objectors aware, you need to submit anything by this time. And I think that would deal with, you know, 90% of the extra evidence that we've got. People would adhere to that, and then in some exceptional circumstances they might need to submit otherwise. But without those guidelines, people just, well, they just submit it a few hours before. So I think it would help to some extent.
Thank you, Adrian. Jane?
Yeah, just to confirm that, I think 24 hours would be a reasonable time frame.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Stanton?
Yeah, I was just thinking of human nature being as it is. Everybody pushes the deadline as hard as they can, whatever it is that they're doing. That actually 48 hours might be a better guideline, because then we will get it 24 hours before. And by making it 48 hours, it actually helps us. And I would imagine, given the sort of evidence I've seen come in at the last minute, it probably would have been available 48 hours before as well.
Thank you, Councillor Stanton. Okay, we've got suggestions of 24 hours or 48 hours. Other suggestions? I mean, I'm personally, in terms of whatever works for licensing as well and for all parties. So if 24 hours is suggested, shall we go for 24 hours? As we've heard from Jane and from our legal officer. Or would the 48 hours help?
Chair, I'm happy. Oh, sorry, I think legal may have their point, but I mean, their hand up rather. But yeah, no, I can totally see where Councillor Stainton's coming from with that sort of buffer. And if you ask for 48 hours, then you're probably going to get stuff 24 hours, whereas otherwise you're not. So, but I don't know what legal might say about that point. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that 48 hours is unreasonable. I think, you know, you could try it and then see how it works with a review. I mean, and then just consider each on a case-by-case basis if you do get late submissions. So, yeah, I don't think 48 hours would be unreasonable.
Okay, Jane, thank you very much. I mean, oh, Councillor Harcourt. You're muted, Councillor Harcourt.
Yeah, sorry, to me, I've got no problem with 48 hours, especially when a lot of the evidence is stuff that people were able to gather, quite some time in advance. If there's an issue where somebody's only been able to get something at the last minute, then obviously that's where discretion comes in and needs to be heard. But if it's just going to be almost a tactic to deliberately present stuff at the last minute, then really I think 48 hours is probably a better judgment. And it is impossible when something comes in very, very late, especially when it's a large amount. And as Councillor Smith says, it does have a tendency to skew things because the focus tends to be on what is this latest piece of evidence that's come in, rather than looking at the evidence as a whole or in the round.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harcourt, for your views. Okay, I think I'm happy with 48 hours if everybody's happy with that. Councillor Siddiqui, your hand.
Yes, Chair, thank you. In my personal view, is fair and reasonable. If you want to consider properly the evidence, and you should have a reasonable time given, and if we can make a policy of 48 hours is reasonable, and we can make a trend, and otherwise the officer will be burdened. In the same time, the obviously committee as well, unnecessary adjournments, unreasonable time, wastage of time, and at least we'll have a reasonable time to consider the all evidence for the best interest of all clients is actually the best interest of clients, and save the time and cost and unnecessary adjournments. I'm agree 48 hours. I don't have a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Siddiqui. Councillor Thorley, other members have given their views. Do you have a view on this?
Yeah, I'm mindful my microphone's a bit playing up, but I'm in agreement with 48 hours.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I think there's consensus with 48 hours. So let's have that 48-hour guideline then. Any further comments, Adrian, on this? Or
no, fantastic. Thank you, Chair. That's really helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Great to have consensus. Good. Okay. Let's move on to agenda item number 6, please. A pool of conditions.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add the police, and in fact, PC Tom Stewart, who's on this call, just suggested some slight revision of 4 conditions in our pool of conditions, which are in relation to deliveries. And as you're aware, the majority of committees which have come in, majority of applications coming before the licensing subcommittee at the moment are applicants who are setting up in a home or a warehouse, and it's all about delivery of alcohol. There are just some slight tweaks in relation to the refusals books and the proof of age policy. I just wanted, because obviously I'm aware that in February we had quite a lengthy discussion about the revised pool of condition, and we revised them then. It was just to ask if members are happy with just some, for us just to amend the pool of conditions again, just to tweak these conditions. There's nothing substantial, it's just slight change in a word in, they're completely enforceable, but just to add a bit more weight to them, really.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Any views on this? Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Agenda item number 7, discussion of exempt elements. Any discussion on the contents of the exempt minutes from the 15th of February meeting and exempt elements for item 4 of tonight's agenda will require the committee to pass a resolution to exclude members of the public and press for the proceedings of this discussion. So my question to you, please, is do members agree with the following resolution to exclude the public and press from the meeting? And I'm going to read out that proposed resolution to you. Under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, that the public and press be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following items of business on the grounds that they contain the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the said Act, as it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Is this agreed by members of the committee? I see some nodding. This is agreed. Okay, unless the other views, if this is agreed, then we shall